Everybody else feel like it's unbelievable how fast this month and this year is going by. It's crazy, but it is going by fast. And we just had our great global event on Saturday. I hope that many, if not all of you, were able to participate. Now we understand we did have some technical difficulties that we know we encountered. By way of explanation, we've originated that event. Now that was the third time, if I remember correctly, from the studios of the local ABC affiliate here in Salt Lake City, and we have had zero transmission issues in the past with doing that. This time, as you know, some of you encountered, well, probably all of you that were participating, encountered slowness, actual stoppage of the event and things like that. And we figured out what happened is that this ABC affiliate is part of a very large, I think it's actually the largest US-based broadcast company. And so they have, their bandwidth is divided up amongst all of their various stations. And because it was a Saturday afternoon in Salt Lake, or morning and afternoon in Salt Lake City, and because they were also streaming things from Japan for the Olympics, they took some of the bandwidth that was normally associated with that station and devoted it to these other tasks, and didn't realize that they would be jeopardizing our transmission at the same time. And so they've apologized profusely. It took them a little while to figure it out. They actually ended up having to get on with the head engineer in their headquarters, I think in Dallas, if I remember correctly, and figuring that out. But as you know, good news was that all of the data actually transmitted to the platform and was recorded. And so if you've not had a chance to go back and listen to it, I urge you to do so, because there are some great presentations by members of our advisory board, by great distributor leaders, some of whom are on tonight, and just a lot of great information. So one of the things that you would not have known about, unless some of you participated in the Spanish language version, which followed the English, was that one of the participants was Dr. Brooks Hybertson from Pathways Biosciences, who, as you know, is a colleague and is actually the president of Pathways Biosciences. And that is the company formed by him, Dr. Joe McCord, Dr. Gao, a very world-renowned geneticist. And they're the ones that developed the NRF2 technology that comprises genomics. And so he gave an update. He told everybody hello from Dr. McCord and gave everyone his best wishes, and talked a little bit about the science that they've been engaged in. And one of those, I'll just give you the name of the study. They just published a study that NRF2 activator as a potential therapeutic agent against COVID-19. And so they talked about the results of this study and COVID and NRF2. In fact, frankly, now this was a cell line study. It was not done on humans, but on human cells. And but they assessed the protective nature of NRF2 activation in regards to COVID-19. Some of you may remember, maybe about over a year ago, I mentioned how research had shown on a previous video, how research had shown how COVID-19 actually worked. And Dr. Earl can talk about this a lot better than I can, but much like other respiratory viruses, this and COVID-19 in some respects operates like a lot of other respiratory viruses, is that you've seen models where the virus is actually covered in spikes, right? And it uses those spikes to attach itself to our cells. But in order to do that, these spikes have to be primed with one or two proteins, molecules that the body produces. One's called ACE2 and one's called TMPRSS2. And if you can stop the body from producing those things, then it can't prime the pump, so to speak. It can't prime the spike, and the spike can't attach. And so there was research going back, 5 or 6 years ago that showed that NRF2 was effective in stopping the body's production of those proteases, thereby preventing the attachment by those viruses. Well, in this particular study, they replicated that earlier research, but this time specifically in regards to our PB formulas. That's what they referred to our formulas as, a PB series of NRF2 activators. And further, they talked about how they actually helped prevent the virus from attaching at a level that's very akin to what the protection that the vaccinations provide, interestingly, and also show that they downregulate the most common response to the virus, which is a very over-the-top, out of proportion inflammatory response, what are sometimes referred to as cytokine storms. And so NRF2 has a real effect, along with, by the way, tetrahydrocurcumin, in helping to avoid those cytokine storms that have been affiliated or associated with severe reactions to COVID-19. So that was interesting. He also talked about some other studies that have been done separate and apart from Pathways Biosciences. For example, this study, it says, can activation of NRF2 be a strategy against COVID-19? And that was not done by Pathways, it's done by another group. And guess what their response was? Not surprisingly, yes, NRF2 can be a strategy against COVID-19. Then he talked about a study done in the UK on over 387,000 adults in terms of lifestyle risk factors and inflammatory mechanisms, and how that related to COVID-19 and what people could expect in terms of their likelihood of a bad result with COVID-19. And the lifestyle risk factors included such things as smoking, obesity, poor nutrition, those type of things, and lack of general exercise or fitness. And not surprisingly, they found that these risk factors created a much higher likelihood of someone not doing well when subjected to COVID-19. And then finally, along those same lines, they also talked about this one. Physical inactivity is associated with a higher risk for severe COVID-19 outcomes. So get out there and move around and be active. And we're actually going to segue from that into talk about the Olympics. Sorry, we're taking you away from the Olympics right now, but Dr. Earl and I were just talking about how it might be kind of fun to have an Olympic-oriented discussion about how our products, if in the hands of Olympians or non-Olympians, we might have are any of you Olympians and I don't know about it? Coco's probably a former Olympian. She's really into fitness, but aside from Coco, I don't know. But in the hands of Olympians or non-Olympians, how our products might be helpful. So Dr. Earl, we were talking about that, and you had some very interesting comments. So if there was, if an Olympic athlete, well, let's talk about what are some of the stresses that Olympic athletes or athletes develop their bodies through.
Oh, somebody's speaker's on. It's overriding everything.
If someone can mute yourself, if we can all mute ourselves, that would be great. Okay, I think, go ahead, Dr. Earl.
Okay, and I apologize. I didn't catch the question, so if you would.
So what are some of the, we all love watching the Olympics. We know that these are highly trained athletes. But what are some of the rigors? What are some of what's the physical, not benefit, what's the physical toll that is placed upon an athlete, especially a highly trained athlete like an Olympian, in even preparing to participate in this type of thing? What happens physiologically to their bodies?
Well, they really do push their bodies to the end, to the end of what's really possible, especially when you become a world-class athlete. I mean, we've all done certain sports, I think, or had some activities throughout our lives, and we often feel like we've pushed ourselves to the limit. And the reality is that's what it takes to really experience growth. They find that the most rapid growth, the best recoveries, all of those components that make elite athletes, it's there because of intensity of the workout, intensity of their mental capacity. Everything is just focused on a very intense workout. Well, that workout then produces a lot of waste. It produces a lot of oxides. It produces a lot of toxins that the body then has to deal with. And certainly their bodies become accustomed to dealing with those, but that a lot of those components drive inflammation. And I think one of the key components that the trifecta really hits well is it attacks inflammation on 3 different levels, 3 very powerful different levels. And that's NRF2 activation. It's obviously the tetrahydrocurcumin, and then butyric acid. Absolutely amazing molecules at going after inflammation. So from the start, their recovery is going to be aided significantly by taking these products.
So one thing we know about with NRF2 activation, we talk a lot about oxidative stress. Many people here on the call tonight have kind of a long history in hearing about oxidative stress. In fact, compared to the general population of the world, some of you are pretty good experts on oxidative stress and the impact of oxidative stress. We know that oxidative stress refers to oxygen and oxidizing, you mentioned that. And we know that oxidative stress occurs when we breathe. It occurs when we utilize food and turn that into the chemicals that and utilize the nutrients that our body needs, and other stresses and wear and tear on the body. So is it correct to say that because of the increased oxygen that a high athlete is taking in, and the increased use of that oxygen throughout the body, because obviously, some of you might not know this, as someone who previously in another life sponsored the U.S. cycling team, in cycling and running and other long distance sports in particular, doping and utilizing drugs is a real problem. And one of the biggest things that they try to do, especially in cycling and these endurance events, is actually increase the body's ability to carry oxygen, okay, and have oxygen in the cells. So because without oxygen, your body fatigues and gets tired. And so Dr. Earl, does that lead then, that greater usage, does that actually increase the amount of oxidative stress these athletes are subjecting themselves to?
Well, it can, and to put this a little bit in perspective, so that the complete process is something called redox. So it's reduction and then oxidation, and it's an equation, if you will, that's in equilibrium, meaning as we produce oxides by using oxygen to release fuel and activate those tissues in our body that produce energy, the mitochondria, well, we produce these oxides, these oxidative stress, and then hopefully the body has equal components that reduce that oxidation and keep it into balance. We have to have some oxidation, or we don't get any energy out of our bodies. And so the idea is to then put or have the ability to reduce that down. And that can come in a lot of various forms. We see a lot of patients that take antioxidants. And those are great if you are in a scenario where you're producing a lot of oxidative stress and you're out of balance. But that may not be the correct answer for everyone as far as that's concerned. What would be better is to turn on the genes, turn on the systems, turn on the programming that deals with that oxidative stress. Well, last time I checked, the NRF2 activation activates 3,000 to 4,000 genes that do just that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then when you want to talk about the most powerful anti-inflammatory that they've found out there as far as a single anti-inflammatory, it's things from curcumin. Well, that's turmeric. Well, that is, and the active form of that is tetrahydrocurcumin. If I remember correctly, they say that getting tetrahydrocurcumin in the form that's ready for the body is 10 times more effective than just straight curcumin. That's amazing. Oh my goodness. And then add to that, butyric acid, which is just this foundational molecule. And we really understand that as a short chain fatty acid, all fatty acids, if they're good natural fatty acids, reduce inflammation at the source. And so those three components balance out that oxidative stress at a very core level. So again, we're talking about these high athletes. Yes, they're using increased oxygen. They're doing all those things to increase energy in their body. And absolutely, these are three very powerful products as far as getting that oxidative stress and then hence the inflammation out of the system. But here's the key, because we all hear about anti-inflammatories, and there's a lot of studies now coming out about how in reality NSAIDs like ibuprofen and naproxen are actually very bad for us in the long run. They destroy everything from collagen formation to something called the glycocalyx that actually lines the vessels of our blood system and lines our digestive system. They're a bad player because they don't keep things in balance. They don't keep the body in balance. The beautiful thing about using products that come from natural sources and work with the body in unison is the fact that it keeps that system in balance. So if you don't need, copious amounts of tetrahydrocurcumin today, your body's not going to bottom out as far as oxidation. It keeps everything in balance. It's a beautiful system.
Now, I'm not sure a lot of people know this about you, Dr. Earl, but you were quite an accomplished baseball player. You played in college. I think that I don't remember if you even had a short stint in the minors, a sniff at some pro ball. But you know what it's like to put your body through rigorous physical exercise, and even if you're a highly trained athlete, putting your body through the rigors of physical exercise and performance can lead to wear and tear, inflammation, actual fatigue, and even damage to the muscles of the body. In fact, that damage actually, as you mentioned earlier, in the form of weight training and other things, we're actually damaging the muscles in order to make them bigger and stronger. But recovery is a big thing. I was reading about this Katie Ledecky, who might be swimming even as we speak, but she has to swim do the 200-meter, I don't know if it's a breaststroke or whatever it is, and then an hour later, she's going to do the 1,500 meters. So she's going to swim 200 meters, and then she's going to swim a mile an hour later. So recovery for her is a big deal. But for all of us, whether we're weekend warriors or not, recovery and helping our body, recover from whatever we put it through is a big deal. How does the trifecta, and you kind of touched on it earlier, but if you could expound, how does the trifecta help in the body's recovery from those type of stresses?
Yeah, wow. So we talked about the core as far as inflammation. So these activities are driving inflammation. They're driving toxins. They're driving waste. They're driving oxidation and use of oxygen. And here's what's ironic about that is, in order to deal with that, the body needs oxygen in order to develop the energy to get rid of a lot of that stress that's happening as well. And so keeping that in balance is key. And a lot of the synthetics, a lot of the things that we get from the pharmaceutical world really don't help that much in the long run as far as keeping that in balance. In fact, they can push the pendulum over to one side. Let's look at each one individually. So genomics, and here's the challenge with genomics, is the fact that it influences so much, so many things, that the reality is we can't list them all. We can't talk about all of the things without just putting everyone to sleep. And so I'm not going to try, but the reality is it absolutely keeps the body moving forward. And that's an important point. We're either in a catabolic state, which means we're tearing things down, or we're in an anabolic state, which means we're building things up. And in order to build things up, we first have to tear things down. So that's the exercise, and that's pushing your body and beating up those muscles. But then there's a cycle where then we start to build things up. And it's this catch right here called inflammation that sometimes stops that cycle from completing. And it's absolutely important that we get rid of some of that excess inflammation. We see high-end athletes try to do this all the time by jumping into cold baths. You see them in those ice baths right after football games or, sports or those type of things. And that's so that they can try to drop the inflammation to the point that the body can deal with it a little bit easier, because they've just absolutely beat up their bodies. Well, again, genomics, amazing as far as that's concerned. We've already talked about, tetrahydrocurcumin and what it will do as far as not just getting rid of the inflammation, but again, they're showing that it has a huge effect in increasing oxidation, in allowing the body to recover from these injuries, sometimes self-induced, because we're pushing our bodies. Absolutely amazing. And then obviously butyric acid. Butyric acid hits the body on so many different levels. Everything from making sure your immune system doesn't go overboard and overreact to this inflammation, making sure that there's increased uptake of energy. And again, it is an epigenetic activator. It activates genes inside of your DNA that help your body recover in a much more rapid fashion.
So one of the things I've been watching about, and maybe some of you have seen this on the television coverage, they time everything. And they talk about the quick reaction time of these swimmers and how quickly they can get off the blocks. So what are the factors that go into reactions, either ours or an Olympians? What affects our ability to react quickly, to take in and process information?
Yeah, so the sequence that happens there is, okay, so let's talk about track and field or swimming. So they obviously get ready. There's the prime. So they position their bodies in a way that they're ready to leap forward. And then they wait for a signal. That signal is often, a single shot or a loud sound. And that has to be processed through the ear. It gets into the brain and then goes through this sequence where it says, is that the sound that I wanted to hear? Yes, it is. Okay. Now let's activate the systems in the body. So then it turns on the parietal lobe and starts to activate all of the muscles throughout the body. Well, that signal has to get from the brain to all of the muscles in the body. And then, and only then, and that's then if the muscles are primed and they're ready to go, and they don't have a lot of lactic acid buildup and other inflammation, then they react and they're off and they're in the water. So there's a lot that happens in that split second from the firing of the gun, the starter gun, to them getting into the water or taking off into the track and field. So your brain is amazing, processing all of this, and then getting the information to where it needs to go. So it's a pretty complex process.
So in that regard, the brain is using chemicals, using neurotransmitters. You've said before in previous presentations, you've instructed us as to where I think upwards of 75 to 80% of neurotransmitters are actually made, which is where?
It's 95% of all neurotransmitters are made in and around the digestive system.
So, so are you saying then that something like link and butyric acid could be very helpful in that microbiome and actually helps to create those critical neurotransmitters that are necessary for the processing of that information for that high-end athlete?
Yeah, and we've got it down to the science now where we can talk about which bacteria is necessary to create which neurotransmitter and which protein is needed to precursor for those neurotransmitters. But here's the key. That all takes place in a happy and healthy digestive system. And I tell you, the absolute goal of butyric acid is what it does to endothelial cells. It is the preferred food source of endothelial cells. Well, if endothelial cells get their preferred food source, they're happy. And they in turn take care of the microbiome, they seal leaky gut, they do all of these amazing things that keep us from decreased inflammation, absorbing our nutrition the right way. I mean, the list just goes on and on. If butyric acid did that alone, boy, people would jump up and down and shout. And we all notice the benefits that take place when we take butyric acid and what it does for our digestive system. Well, again, if you're looking now at somebody who is, a high-end athlete and really needs to get everything in balance, including the neurotransmitters, having a healthy, happy GI system is absolutely critical. And then that in turn will produce neurotransmitters that get to the brain and to the rest of the body so they can have that explosive reaction and go.
So while all of us may not be on the starting blocks for a swimming race or track and field, there may be other times when we want to make sure that we're processing information as quickly as possible. While driving, for example, we may want to have the best reaction times that we can. I think while we're working, while we're just thinking and responding to any type of situation, I think that we would like to be able to increase our faculties, our ability to process information correctly and respond appropriately, just staying sharp. And I think what you're saying there is that as we take care of the gut, it takes care of us by making sure that those neurotransmitters, number one, survive and get to the proper place at the proper time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other component that goes along with brain function is sealing the blood, what's called the blood-brain barrier. So that is a place where the body only lets certain things into this cranial area, and it tries to control it very tightly. Well, guess what? Those are made up of endothelial cells. So when we take Link and we're taking butyric acid, guess what's happy? Our blood-brain barrier. So a lot of that leak that happens that lets all this misinformation in our brain that leads to brain fog and confusion and inability to concentrate and all of these other components is either eliminated or greatly reduced by taking butyric acid, because again, we give those endothelial cells their preferred food source. So now the neurotransmitters that need to get into the brain do get into the brain, and the garbage that doesn't need to get into the brain doesn't get there. In fact, there's a recent study, and they're doing some confirmation, but they're showing amazing results with butyric acid and autism. They're showing amazing results with butyric acid and test performance, and again, increased activity, concentration, the list focus, the list goes on and on and on. So what doesn't butyric acid touch? It just touches everything.
Well, that's really important. We hear about leaky gut syndrome, and we know that that's a case where those endothelial cells are not as tight or have holes or gaps, and that then leads to bad things getting out of our gut and into our bloodstream and causing inflammatory responses, allergies, all that kind of stuff. The only thing worse than that, I think, would be to have leaky brain syndrome, where that blood-brain barrier.
They go together.
Yeah,
they're absolutely connected.
And it's interesting, if you haven't seen kind of the Link origin video, which talks about how Al Zapp, who presented at the conference on Saturday, first introduced butyric acid to me, and the effect that it had upon a famous gastroenterologist's son who has autism. I urge you to watch that video. It's powerful. What's interesting is that another presenter at the conference on Saturday, as you know, was Rajesh Durbal, this triple amputee who participates with Dr. Joe Maroon in Ironman triathlons. And he, anybody who subjects themselves to training and or participating in an Ironman is just undergoing tremendous inflammatory responses because of the pressures that you're putting your body under. But try doing that when you're running, swimming, biking with prosthetics. Rajesh is in really horrendous pain after these races, so much so that you wonder, why in the world are you doing this? But he has received a lot of relief from taking Optimend. He's a huge believer in the anti-inflammatory impact of Optimend in his life. But what's interesting is that Rajesh was introduced to us by Dr. Maroon, and they became great friends. And if you haven't watched the video about how that happened, go back and listen to Dr. Maroon's presentation. It's a very inspiring story. But what's interesting is that you may not remember that when I first met Dr. Maroon, and I told him that we had this product name that included butyric acid, here is this world-renowned neurosurgeon, and like Dr. Earl, he knew all about it. He's like, oh yeah, I know about the benefits of butyric acid. Now, remember, he's done over 30,000 surgeries most of which involve tumor removal in the brain or in the spine. He's also, because of his role as the head team doctor for the Pittsburgh Steelers, has been on the forefront of CTE, traumatic brain injury, and concussion injuries, and how to treat that, and preparing protocols. And so he knows of the restorative brain restorative effects of both curcumin and butyric acid. And I'll never forget. I'm in my office right now. He was sitting across my desk from me, and he said, "David," he said, "we've tried to use butyric acid, and we've tried. Jeff Boast and I and others have tried to put it into like protein bars or something to cover up the terrible taste and terrible smell that exists naturally with butyric acid." And he said, "We always knew that if somebody could really deal with that effectively, they would have the holy grail of supplements." I think that's, Dr. Earl, you and I have talked about this a lot. I think you also believe that as what you call a foundational molecule, Al Zapp calls a God molecule. This butyric acid stuff is pretty amazing. And the fact that Al Zapp was able to develop this Silox system with the DEX key. If you haven't listened to his presentation or had trouble listening to it, the Silox system in which they force a molecule of butyric acid into a molecule of a dextrin, a cyclodextrin, that's actually not new. That's not new technology. The food companies and pharmaceutical companies have been using that for a long time for a variety of purposes. What's new and what's getting him his patent is the DEX key component. The DEX key is adding an amylase. Dr. Earl, what is an amylase?
Amylase is an enzyme. It helps break down certain food components.
So what happens is if you just leave it in the dextrin in the trap, guess what? It might just go straight through the system and never get used or not get metabolized where it needs to. So the trick here, the secret science, so to speak, is that amylase that he adds in, that at the proper time, once it's gotten through the gut, it releases that molecule to be used, to be metabolized and sent to the body where it needs to be. That's really the beauty. And guess what? No one will ever have that because that's patented to Tesseract Medical, and we're the licensees of that. So people can talk to you about their curcumin. You say, well, is it tetrahydrocurcumin? That's what curcumin gets broken down into by the body. And most of them will say no. And then you'll say, well, even if it is tetrahydrocurcumin, how sure are you that it's being absorbed very well? Does it have an amylase? Does it have anything that's helping it deal with its molecule size? And first of all, they're going to say, I have no clue what you're talking about. But you'll be able to say, listen, let me talk to you about Optimend, because this science is going to make sure that it's getting into the system so that it can be absorbed and made available. Dr. Earl, we've talked a lot about now this trifecta. We talk about kind of the inside-outside approach to aging as well. And we have Emora, which helps with restorative effect upon the skin. But you pointed out something to me probably 2 years ago when we talked about the inside-outside approach to aging and butyric acid's effect upon that. Would you mind kind of going over that again and what connection there has with butyric acid and how we look on the outside?
Wow. So once again, we get back to some really basics, which is that butyric acid is the preferred food source of endothelial cells. Well, where do we find those endothelial cells? We've talked about the digestive system. We've talked about the blood-brain barrier. Well, the other place that's lined, the other several places that are lined with endothelial cells is all of your arteries and veins throughout your entire body. They are lined with endothelial cells. So are your lungs. And lastly, your skin. So butyric acid is a core food source for healthy skin. I remember, and there's a video of my daughter Sage, and she's had some GI issues, and I put her on link for that. And she comes in and she said, Dad, I need more of this acne medicine. And I'm like, what acne medicine? What are you talking about? She said, whatever that stuff you gave me, it's amazing. It's totally cleared up my face. So because we were cleaning up the digestive system, because we were cleaning up her inflammation, I was thinking, okay, this is great. But no, we were actually giving the food source for the skin and producing healthy, vibrant, radiant skin. As a dad, I thought, what am I doing? Get that out of my daughter's house, out of her hands, because I don't want boys chasing her because she, and no, I'm kidding. But the reality is she was so excited about how good it made her look. And the fact that it cleaned up her skin from the inside out, just as you mentioned, absolutely amazing how that worked. And it works to some degree in all of us. Now, you know, some guy like me, I need a lot more butyric acid than most. But the reality is it works. It truly works. Here's what's interesting. So I have a friend in Las Vegas. You and I both know Wayne Harris. Haven't seen him in quite some period of time. And I've been really just vigilant about my trifecta. And except for the last week, I got to tell you another funny story. So I've been just vigilant about the trifecta. And I went down to see him and he said, "What are you doing? Your color is so much better." Well, blood flows better. Your skin looks so much clearer. Well, obviously I'm feeding it. So from the inside out, I am looking much better. And he noticed a change in just a short period of time. So my other story that I have to tell you, so I take my meds for my trifecta mostly at home. And I had my supply of Optimend here at the office. And for 3 or 4 days, I didn't make it to the office. And so for 3 or 4 days, I missed my Optimend. Oh, did I miss my Optimend? I really noticed a difference. And the same happens with any of the trifecta that I miss anymore. If it's even for a few days, my body says, "What are you doing? Where's that awesomeness that makes us feel so much better?" And I once again just proved to myself, sadly so, that I am a huge fan of these absolutely amazing foundational molecules.
Well, thanks, Dr. Earl. Well, we'll turn it over to a little bit of Q&A, but I also want to make sure that as we're talking about sports and performance and recovery, that you remember the one study that we talked about, that physical fitness, physical activity is a great protector for a lot of things, including against respiratory illnesses like COVID-19. And as a great way to help you get going, if you haven't been, is using Arrow in addition to the trifecta to help you get up off the couch, and whether you actually need to lose some of the COVID 20 or 15 or whatever your COVID experience may have been, or you just need to tone up. Physical activity will do that, and so I urge everyone to do that. So before we've got about 45 minutes here, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But if anybody has any specific questions that they would like to ask Dr. Earl, we can do that. Let me know. Diane?
Okay, so specifically, many of us are familiar with NRF2, and we're used to one product downregulating the inflammation, breaking up scar tissue, doing all the wonderful things that it does. We're not used to having three products that really complement each other but work together. So say we have someone that I'm doing this really with the business, but I haven't had any customers yet. But say if I have someone, like say my daughter, someone might not see the whole value of the trifecta, or they might say I can only afford one product. Like she has autoimmune. And so a lot of us, what we're doing is we've just been going straight to that, not the Optimend or the links, the genomics. Yeah, because that's where we're thinking, well, because we know it downregulates inflammation and it does all those wonderful things. So we're a little confused on what exactly to direct someone in if they only want to start on one product, one of the trifecta, or I'm having a lot of questions from the team on that, and also I've had the same question. So how do we know which one to direct them to if they just want to start on one? And some of the people that I'm working with are very, very, they have a lot of detoxing, metal detoxing, just a lot of things going on. And how do we know which one to start them on if they don't want to go on the full trifecta?
Great question. That's where they call medicine a practice, because what we do is we say, okay, let's try this. And then they come back a few weeks later and say that didn't work. And then we say, okay, let's try this. Unfortunately, without getting so deep into their chemistry, their blood work, and what's actually going on in their system in exquisite detail, that's impossible for me to predict. And it's impossible for you to predict. It just is. You know, I often tell patients that at least for me, if I'm going to start somewhere, I know I need to fix my gut. I have to fix my gut. And so if I have a patient that says, I can only try one, which one's going to make the biggest difference? I tell them I don't know, because, and the other thing is too, again, with them working in harmony, it's kind of like a triangle. A triangle is one of the most powerful, strong engineering shapes out there, because if it's an isosceles triangle, wow, it just has some incredible strength, and you start to counterbalance some of those and you get amazing structural strength. The same is true with these, because they work so uniquely inside of your body. So giving you a specific answer as far as which one's going to be the most powerful for that person, well, we could figure it out, but that takes, you know, again, blood work, chemistry, a good history, and exam, and really sorting out what's going on. My logic says, with a lot of these patients, I will start them out on lean, unless their preferred deal is talking about straight pain. Then I'll say, okay, start with the Optimin. So it just depends upon what they're complaining of. But I really want to get them on the trifecta as soon as possible, because it works so synergistically and so powerfully. And so you know, that's to answer your question. Unfortunately, it's impossible. But you really need to say, okay, what is their symptoms? What's really driving some of this, and see if you can tease that, and then maybe you can make some decisions based on that.
I have another question, but I'm sure somebody else, let's go to somebody else first.
Okay, let's see if anybody else has another question.
I had a question.
Hi,
Okay,
Coco.
is the genomic or NFR2 or butyric acid helps to the molecule of fulvic acid to be active? Because I know that helps with a lot of detoxing, and also helps to correct cell imbalance, and also control of free radicals, even though we know the superoxidomutasa controls free radicals. What do we know about fulvic acid?
Well, we know a lot about fulvic acid. It's actually amazing as far as bringing oxygen and also then repair into the systems. I've looked at everything from fulvic acid for restoring soil microbiome to then also us as humans. It's amazing from that standpoint as far as kickstarting the body's ability to bring everything in balance. Everything works in conjunction. So fulvic acid really does it shines in a folate B vitamin complex that is, again, this cycle that goes around. And so as far as where it directly connects to butyric acid, tetrahydrocurcumin, and the NRF2, I don't know that we have a lot of specifics that I've seen on that, but fulvic acid is very powerful. Activating it, as far as that is concerned, I think fulvic acid has a lot of different paths that it can be activated from. And so I don't know that I have a specific answer as far as their connection.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't know a lot about it. I know that in some cases they are additive. I don't necessarily think that neither butyric acid nor NRF2 activation increases naturally the body's production of folic acid. I think folic acid is one of those things that we primarily need to get exogenously outside the body and put it in, but it can be additive. But I don't know a lot about it either. So,
well, and interesting when we talk about that, and David and I had talked about this just a little bit before, but some of the most powerful things that you can add to your diet are things like that fulvic acid and then fermented foods. And it's interesting because they drew the parallel of adding fermented foods, sauerkraut, kefir, yogurt, active yogurt, not the dead stuff that they over sugar. All of these fermented foods that are amazing. What they drew is the fact that when they get into the body, they activate the microbiome's ability to produce butyric acid. So that was pretty interesting.
But the other thing and tying into what you just said, the ability to get to provide your body with the proper nutrients and really focusing on the essential nutrients. You know, we get a lot of certain nutrients. Most people get a lot of protein, they get a lot of carbs, which are also essential nutrients, but we don't get nearly enough of certain vitamins, certain micronutrients. And so we should really pay attention to our diet. And the beauty of making sure that those endothelial cells are healthy means that you can help increase the surety that those things are going to get absorbed, which is one of the roles that the endothelial cells and the stomach lining has, make sure there's proper absorption of those nutrients. So all of those, it really is very interconnected. I think we've got time for one more. Before we go to Diane, back to Diane, anybody else have another question they want to ask?
I do.
Mark?
I have a person that went to the doctor and their blood test shows that they have high levels of inflammation in their body. And so I was torn between the Optimend versus the genomics because of our past knowing about how it reduces oxidative stress. I don't know. I was torn in what to tell him, which one he should take.
Dr. Earl?
Yeah, we're back to a very similar question that Diane asked is, how do you know which one's going to have the biggest impact on that particular person? And unfortunately, again, without doing a deep dive into chemistry, et cetera, it's hard to say. I will say, again, the way I make my choice is if someone really comes in and they are having a lot of GI issues, then I'll start thinking, okay, I'm going to start them on Link. Obviously, hands down, if they have the ability to start all of them, absolutely, that's what we do. That's a no-brainer. But if they have primarily GI issues, I'll lean towards the Link. If a lot of their symptoms seem to range around pain, I've noticed that the Optimend is every bit and even more effective than ibuprofen, and especially as you start to build day after day its anti-inflammatory effects. So the consistent consumption of Optimend is amazing as far as getting rid of some of those aches and pains. And then but again, we're back to that same conversation as far as genomics has so much research behind it. The reality is, what doesn't it touch? And so, but that's kind of the thought process I'll go through is, okay, major GI issues, let's start with the Link. And what I find is after patients start it, sometimes they'll miss a few days and they're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And they'll be back and they'll say, okay, what else do you have? And then we start talking about everything else. So I know that's kind of a non-direct answer, but the reality is that's even where we're at as far as medicine is concerned.
I think one thing that's interesting and to take note of is, Dr. McCord's company is called Pathways Biosciences, because we know that these chemicals, these neurochemicals and other chemicals that the body uses, they travel along pathways into our cells, into the genes and things like that. And so, and some of these have the pathways to downregulate these inflammatory cytokines. I know that genomics and Optimend to some degree operate upon the same pathways, but there's also some deviation. There's also some different pathways, and then link, which butyric acid, which also affects inflammation, operates under some different pathways. Just kind of going to, I mean, I'm not a doctor, I just play one on TV. Dr. Earl is actually a doctor, but I think it kind of goes to what people are experiencing. If they're feeling a lot of pain associated with that, those high inflammatory markers, I think they'll notice something in a shorter period of time with Optimend and perhaps Link. Whereas if these markers are high, but they're not necessarily showing, they're not necessarily dealing with a lot of pain, and maybe they didn't even know they had high inflammatory markers until these blood tests came back. Well, then maybe genomics is the answer there, because it is going to deal with those inflammatory cytokines. But most people in taking genomics, this is not entirely true, but in terms of its acute pain relief, is generally not as noticeable as Optimend is in things that I'm hearing. So Diane, go ahead.
I agree with that completely, because I actually tell, my patients, when they come into the clinic, they leave with Optimend and usually Link. And then we talk to them about genomics. But they leave with that, and I tell them, this is your ibuprofen substitute, the Optimend, meaning you want to take it every day to knock the inflammation down and build up that level inside of your body and then drop the inflammation. But then if you have acute pain, if it's a 2 ibuprofen pain, then I'll take 2 Optimend. If it's a 3 ibuprofen pain, I'll take 3 Optimend, and it knocks the pain. For me, I'm very responsive to it. It's great.
Okay, well, let's finish up with you, Diane.
Okay, this has probably been gone over in other calls, but I haven't had a chance to catch up on those. And Coco's really great at answering these. But see, if I have a child that's 40 to 100 pounds, as compared to a grown man that might be 200 to 220, a big guy. Do they all take, like that kind of answered my question. A grown man might take more than one, but it's okay for the child to take the one. And how about breaking them up? The other one was not a capsule, and we could break them up easier for children. What do you recommend?
Well, so that gets really sticky. The reality is we have to be very specific about, not necessarily recommending this for children. But that said, is it very safe for children? Yes. Is it safe for pregnancy? Yes. All of these come in, they're prevalent in nature. There's nothing chemical or artificial or those type of things about what's in these products, except for the fact that they're amazing. That's pretty synthetic. I'm just saying, kidding. I'm kidding. But they're safe. But to give specific recommendations as far as dosage based on weight, you're going to have to get specifically with either their pediatrician or their primary care physician. That's again, an impossibility to say in this kind of scenario, because then, somebody gives a wrong dose, and yeah, we just can't go there. I hope that helps, but it doesn't. So I'm sorry, but there's a little bit of a legal bridge we're having to cross there, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I'll just take a stab at that, Diane. You might say, actually, in regards to, you might remember back in, of course, I don't know when you were at LifeVantage, but back in the day, Dr. McCord used to be asked about Protandim. And from a legal standpoint, we also used to say, just legally speaking, despite the safety profile of these ingredients, we don't talk about them in terms of being used for kids or pregnant women, even though we think they're safe. But he would actually say that in regards to Protandim, it actually wasn't, the dosage wasn't based upon the weight or the size. It was actually based more, but it was actually kind of interesting. He actually termed it in terms of the surface area of the skin, if you could imagine. And so it wasn't a weight related, it was an overall size related, which is actually always kind of interesting to me. And whether that applies to these other products as well, we don't know. The good thing is that because the safety profile is such that you can start out and start out small. The capsules can easily be taken apart, and I have a 5-year-old granddaughter who was having some gut issues and also some rash issues. And I just simply told my daughter, I said, try her on half of a link and just put it in her milk. And it cleared it right up. I mean, it really had a profound effect upon it. Didn't have to worry about her, swallowing a capsule or anything like that. So, from that standpoint, there might need to be a little bit of trial and error, but as long as you err on small dosing, you'll be fine. One last thing, someone mentioned that they just started the Trifecta a couple of weeks ago, and for about a week they had kind of a strange vibration or buzzing in their body that lasted for like a week, and was curious as to what might be going on. Sounds maybe kind of like a detox effect to me, doctor, but any comments on that?
Yeah, that's really pretty amazing. I got to tell you, so again, funny story. So back when I was doing emergency medicine, I had a really good friend, and she's still a good friend. And we went to book group with her, and she would come with all of these varied complaints that just similar to this. I'm buzzing, or else I get a shock when I touch the shopping carts, and I noticed this, and I'm noticing different colors, and I just sat there and thought, oh my goodness, what is going on in this woman? And we're trained, and that's the hard part about going to a doctor for help. We're trained that if there are symptoms that we can't explain in this tiny little box, we say it's in their head or they're crazy, and that's sad. Because the reality is, as I progressed in my studies and learned what the body does and the importance of frequency, vibration, energy, and radiation, not radiation, resonance, I really started to say, oh my gosh, so all of these complaints that she had are real, and they're a part of what's going on inside of her body as she makes a shift. So we not only make a chemical shift, we make an energy shift, and then we make a mechanical shift. There are these three major energy components that shift as we start to change what happens in our body. And so that's what they're noticing. As the chemistry changes, the energy changes, and then they'll start to notice some of the mechanical changes. The reality is it happens in all of us. There are just some people that are very sensitive to that. It's pure real science. It happens in all of us. They just notice. And the key is to stay the course, get through to the other side, because it's awesome.
Great. Okay, well, listen, everybody, it's been great to have you on. Corinne's husband, we didn't learn your name, but I hope you've been taking good notes there, my friend. Otherwise, you're in big trouble.
Right.
We're glad to have you with us. We're glad to have all of you with us. And thanks to Dr. Earl for spending the time with us. And I guess bottom line, whether you are an Olympic athlete or not, the Trifecta is for you, and the other products as well. It's all a matter of activating those bodily systems that we have. And really, we're not doing anything for the body that it's not already designed to do. We're just putting it in a position to heal itself and do the things that that this remarkable thing that we call a body, it can really enable us to do. So on that note, I'll say goodbye. Thanks to everyone for being with us tonight. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.
Good night.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Earl.
Really wonderful. Thank you so much.